हम्म, जी हाँ जी। ayah of Quran Azim al-Shan. So today is also the continuation of Surah Al-Baqarah. I want to recite from verses 20 to 24. And I request all brothers and sisters, could you please say loud salawat? اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. يا أيها الناس اعبدوا ربكم الذي خلقكم والذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. الذي جعل لكم الأرض فراشا والسماء بناء وأنزل من السماء ماء فأخرج به من الثمرات رزقا لكم فلا تجعلوا لله أندادا وأنتم تعلمون. وإن كنتم في ريب مما نزلنا على عبدنا فأتوا بسورة من مثله وادعوا شهداءكم من دون الله إن كنتم صادقين. فإن لم تفعلوا ولن تفعلوا فاتقوا النار التي وقودها الناس والحجارة أعدت للكافرين. صدق الله العلي العظيم. ربنا اغفر لي ولوالدي وللمؤمنين يوم يقوم الحساب برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. صلوات.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
MashaAllah, brother. MashaAllah. Baridigar salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
We are here to commemorate the great sacrifice of Mawla Hussain alayhi salam, his loyal companion and his family member, for the sake of Islam, to save Islam from the evils. 2 days, the 5th day of Muharram and 6th night, Imam Hussain opened a dialogue with the Umar bin Saad, Lanatullah alayh, and convinced him to left the seat so that the Imam with his family and companion could leave Iraq. Imam knows they will not allow him, but Imam wants to give them an option. In the beginning, Umar bin Saad do not want to fight with Imam Hussain alayhi salam, so he sent the message of Imam to the governor of Kufa, Ibn Ziyad, Lanatullah alayh, but Shimar bin Joshan, Lanatullah alayh, opposed it strongly. Another meeting was set with Imam Hussain alayhi salam, and Umar demanded to Imam, you can leave Iraq, only you should come to Kufa and pledge allegiance to the Yazid ibn Muawiyah Lanatullah alayh. On hearing this, Imam refused that and give universal statement, death with dignity is better than the life with humanity. Our condolences to our Imam of time, Imam al-Asr alayhi salam, and all our Ahlul Bayt, especially Umreen of Saskatoon, for Muhammad wa Ahlul Bayt Muhammad salawat.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
इमाम हुसैन की मनक़बत की चंद इशार, हुसैन ही ने किया कर्ज जिंदगी का अदा, हुसैन ही ने किया कर्ज जिंदगी का अदा, अज़ा अज़ा में रवां है हुसैन की सदा, यही सरात हकीकत यही है राहे खुदा, हुसैन ही ने किया हुर को हुरमला से जुदा, हुसैन राह के पत्थर से दूर बनाता है, हुसैन राह के पत्थर से दूर बनाता है, हुसैन आज भी कैदी को हुर बनाता है। पर मोहम्मद व अहले बैत मोहम्मद सल्लल्लाहु अलैहि वसल्लम। I would like to invite Brother Khan to recite Salam. Brother Khan for Muhammad wa Ahle Bayt Muhammad sallallahu
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
I wish you the Hazrat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
सरों को देख के ज़ैनब ये कहती थी अक्सर, तुम्हें ओनो मोहम्मद ये माना रोएगी। सरों को देख के ज़ैनब ये कहती थी अक्सर, तुम्हें ओनो मोहम्मद ये माना रोएगी। मैं तुमको रोऊं या ज़हरा के लाल को रोऊं, कहाँ तलक दिए मंजर में देखती जाऊं, सिरा पे साथ तुम्हारे है मेरे भाई का सर, तुम्हें ओनो मोहम्मद ये माना रोएगी। मैं पहले भाई फर्शे अज़ाब छाऊंगी, पलट के शाम से फिर करबला में जाऊंगी। तेरी नजर में है अब तक वो असर का मंजर, तुम्हें ओनो मोहम्मद ये माना रोएगी। असीर हो गए मातम नहीं किया मैंने, अभी किसी का भी पुरसा नहीं दिया मैंने। बताऊं कैसे मेरे दिल पे चलते हैं खंजर, तुम्हें ओनो मोहम्मद ये माना रोएगी। अभी तो देना है भाभी रबाब को पुरसा, उजड़ गया है गुलस्तान उम्मे लैला का, शकील असगरो अकबर तुम्हें और मोहम्मद ये माना रोएगी। तुम्हारे लाशों को मैं दरमियां से गुजरती हूँ, कलेजा थाम के पुश्ते शकूर पे बैठी हूँ। खुदा ही जाने के जिंदा हूँ अब तलब क्यों कर तुम्हें और मोहम्मद ये माना रोएगी। सरों को देख के ज़ैनब ये कहती थी अक्सर तुम्हें और मोहम्मद ये माना रोएगी। तुम्हें और मोहम्मद ये माना रोएगी।
माशाअल्लाह माशाअल्लाह वालिदा सलावत। ये कायनात में जो सुबह शाम बाकी है, ये जो जमीनों जमा का निजाम बाकी है, ये जो रसूले खुदा का क़याम बाकी है, ये जो रुकू सुजूदो क़याम बाकी है, सबूत है कि शाहे मशरक़ैन जिंदा है, यजीद कत्ल हुआ हुसैन जिंदा और मोहम्मद जिंदा
हुसैनियत
जिंदा
यजीदियत
मुर्दा
यजीदियत
मुर्दा
मशहूद इमाम हुसैन अलैहिस्सलाम बुलंदतर सलावत।
I would like to invite Brother Yusha to recite Salam Bahdur Imam Hussain alayhi salam Balantar Salawat.
Allahumma salli ala
पानी प्यासों को जब तेरा होगे, करबला वाले याद आएंगे। पानी प्यासों को जब तेरा होगे, करबला वाले याद आएंगे। पानी प्यासों को जब पिलाओगे, कोई मर जाता है किसी का घर, कांधा देते हैं लोग आके मगर, शेर तन्हा उठाई लाश सर, जब जमा कोई लाश उठाओगे, करबला वाले याद आएंगे। पानी प्यासों को जब पिलाओगे, करबला में बना था जो दूल्हा के मुकद्दस था उसके दहन का, शेख दुल्हन का सुखा को पैगाम, बेटियों का चुकर बसाओगे, करबला वाले याद आएंगे। पानी प्यासों को जब पिलाओगे, अली असगर की माँ बेनज़री थी, रंग में यूं दी रहा के रोया नहीं, माँ परेशान होना चाहे जख्मे खाकर जो मुस्कुराओगे करबला वाले याद आएंगे पानी प्यासों को जब पिलाओगे बाप बेरा था जब सकीना से हर कदम पर उसे तमाचे लगे कोई देता न था तसल्ली उसे जब यतीमों के तरस खाओगे करबला वाले याद आएंगे पानी प्यासों को जब पिलाओगे एक बेटी जहां में है सुहरा कब्र तक जिसका इंतजार गया जिसका बाबा न लौट कर आया घर में परदेस से जब आओगे करबला वाले याद आएंगे पानी प्यासों को जब पिलाओगे करबला वाले याद आएंगे पानी प्यासों को जब पिलाओगे माशाअल्लाह माशाअल्लाह बारिज़ीगा सलावत Now I would like to invite Brother Nader Shah to recite Salam wa Hazur Imam Hussain alayhi salam Bulandar Salawat. Sallallahu alayk ya baban najatil ummah Sallallahu alayk ya sari'at dam'at as-sakibah Sallallahu alayk ya sahib al-musibat al-watibah Sallallahu alayk ya Aba Abdillah ya mazlum Karbala Sallallahu alayk wa ala al-mustashhidina bayna yadayk ya Aba Abdillah Ya laytana kunna ma'akum fanafuzu fawzan 'azima कोई बहिश्त में वजद अज़ करबला ये तो
ای کشته که جان دو عالم فدای تو دیوانوار آمدم سابقت لگاه وقتی به استغاثه شنیدم صدای تو یا حسین در حیرتم چه شد که نشد آسمان خراب وقتی شنید ناله و غربتای تو خورشید و ماه و جن و ملک خون گریستند وقتی میان لوجه خون بود جای تو یا حسین رفتی به پاس حرمت کعبه به کربلا شد کعبه حقیقی دل کربلای تو اجر هزار عمر و حج در طواف توست اجر هزار عمر و حج در طواف توست ای مروه و صفا به فدای صفای تو یا حسین با گفتن رضا به قضائک به قتلگاه شد متحد رضای خدا با رضای تو تا با نماز خوف تو گردد قبول حق تا با نماز خوف تو گردد قبول حق شد سجدگاه اهل یقین خاک پای تو یا حسین جان تو هرچی داشتی به خدا دادی ای حسین فردا خداست جل و جلاله جزای تو فردا خداست جل و جلاله جزای تو اندر مینا ذبیح یکی بود و زنده رفت اندر مینا ذبیح یکی بود و زنده رفت ای صد ذبیح کشته ای صد ذبیح کشته در مینای تو یا ابا عبدالله برخیز و باز بر سرینه آیهی بخوان برخیز و باز بر سرینه آیهی بخوان ای من فدای آن سری هستم جدای تو خونی خداست خون تو جز خدای نیست خون خداست خون تو جز خدای توست ای کشته خدا ای کشته خدا به خدا کن بهای تو یا حسین جان ما را خشوع بندگی آموز چون خداست ما خشوع بندگی آموز چون خداست در مجلسی عزای تو صاحب عزای تو آنجا که حد ممکن واجب و توی ای منتهای اوج بشر ابتدای تو یا حسین جان اللهم اكشف هذه الأمة عن هذه الأمة بحضوره وعجل لنا ظهوره إنه يرونه بعيد ونراه قريب يا رب الحسين فحق الحسين اشفي صدر الحسين بظهور الحجة ببركة صلوات على محمد وآل محمد
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
MashaAllah, brother Nader Shah. MashaAllah, Baradigar Salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Husaini school registration is open and for the children and youth for the next semester. Upstairs, Sister Asma set a stall for the kids. You can get registered your kids. Contact with brother Mayun Zadi. They have form as well, and Sister Asma. Muhammad Muhammad Salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.
Today, Majlis and Tabarak is sponsored by Brother Ali Zadeh, Brother Jawad Azmi, Brother Haider Abbas, Brother Hamad Ali, Brother Ali Raza, and Sister Dr. Shala. For their marhumeen, one Surah Fatiha Ma'as Salawat.
اللهم صل على محمد
Ali.
محمد.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Muhammad wa Nabi Muhammad salawat. I would like to invite Hujjatul Islam wal Muslimin Alama Maulana Salim Himji to recite Majlis tonight. By Muhammad wa Nabi Muhammad salawat.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء وسيد المرسلين وشفيع المذنبين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيب قلوبنا وطبيب نفوسنا وشفيع ذنوبنا أبي القاسم محمد. ثم الصلاة والسلام على أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المتجلين لا سيما مولانا وسيدي صاحب العصر والزمان روحي وأرواح العالمين له الفداء وأجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف ولعنة دائمة على أعدائهم من الآن إلى قيام يوم الدين. أما بعد فقد قال الله الحكيم في كتابه المبين بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أن اعبدوا الله واتقوه وأطيعون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. For the hasten and return of our 12th Imam and our awaited Savior, Imam al-Hujjah, one salawat upon Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Tonight, the night is the 6th night of this month of Muharram of the new Islamic year, and we continue in our commemoration of the tragedy of Karbala. We continue in the remembrance of the supreme sacrifice of Abu Abdullah Hussein and his family and friends, alayhi salatu wassalam. And we continue in the discussion that we've been having, the theme that we have been going over for the last 5 nights on Islam being the complete code of life. And we began with the verse of the Quran from chapter number 71, as I have been beginning every night, from chapter 71 known as Surah Nuh, the chapter named after Prophet Noah. The same prophet that we know was given the commandment to build an ark. Humanity was going to be destroyed at that time. And Allah commanded Noah to build an ark. He built an ark. We know the story, I'm sure, about it. But before Prophet Noah built that ark, before the destruction and the deluge of the flood came upon his community, Allah wanted to obviously give people a chance. Because God is not in the business of killing people without giving them an opportunity to repent. Allah's tradition, the Sunnatullah, as we call it, the tradition of Allah, just as Rasulullah has a Sunnah, the Prophet of Islam has a Sunnah. We follow the tradition of our beloved Prophet. He tells us to do things in a certain way. We follow it. He tells us how to pray. We follow him. Allah has a Sunnah as well, and that's an entire discussion on its own. What do you mean by the Sunnah of Allah? But Allah works in certain ways. And one of those ways of Allah is that He does not destroy a community who have gotten to the brink of rebellion until He ensures that He sends a messenger and He gives the people ample opportunity to ask forgiveness. So with Prophet Noah, it wasn't 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, it was actually hundreds of years that they were given the chance to repent, to go from their evil ways of idolatry, of polytheism, of sin, of wickedness, of debauchery that they were involved in. And eventually a time came where that was it. And Allah told Prophet Noah that this is the order, build the ark under our supervision. The ark is built, a flood comes. Not only are the people of his community who did not follow him, not only are they drowned, but as we know, his own son is also drowned in the flood, and he protests to Allah. He says that this is my son, he's min ahli, he's of my family. And Allah says, إِنَّهُ لَيْسَ مِنْ أَحْلِكَ إِنَّهُ عَمَلٌ غَيْرُ صَالِحٍ. He is not of your family. He might be your blood relation, your biological son, but he is an unrighteous and unworthy action, Allah calls him. But that was after years of propagation of a message. And as I've been mentioning every night, that the message that he brought was very simple. Worship God, know and worship your Creator, have the taqwa, the reverence, the piety of God, and obey the prophets. It's those 3 factors which make up religion. Aqaid, the theology, which we have to all believe in on our own. You can't come to God on the day of judgment and Allah will say, why did you believe in me as the one God? And you'll say, well, my madrasa teacher told me to believe in one God, so I followed her or him. You can't say, well, I heard it in a Muharram lecture, there's one God, and so I believed it. No, we all have to come to a realization of one God on our own. Yes, we follow the scholars who bring the proofs, the evidence, and we learn from our teachers, but ultimately we have to have conviction in the usul ad-din, the principles of this religion. And then Prophet Noah was telling the people that you also have to have morality. Right? It's not enough to believe in God, but you be a wicked, immoral person. You say, I believe in Allah, I believe in the Prophet, and I follow the Ahlul Bayt. But then when I go to work, I can cheat customers, I can steal, I can rip off people. No, that goes against the ethos of religion. And then obviously the third part of religion, which is integral to our life, and we will look at that the next 2 nights is the practice, the ahkam, the fiqh that we follow, praying, fasting, charity, all of those things that are maraja taqleed, may Allah protect and preserve all of them, that they mention in their books of Islamic law. And as we've been saying that the ahkam is a very small percentage of the Quran, maybe 500 ayat at most. Akhlaq is almost a third of the Quran, 2,000 verses of the Quran just about morality. And obviously the rest of the Quran talks, another large portion is about the Day of Judgment, 2,000 ayat. That's about what, 4,500 verses? You've got 6,300 verses in the Quran, so you're left with about 1,800 verses about the past prophets, the enemies of God. You've got stories from all the time from Adam to Noah to Abraham. You've got the flood. You've got the story of the children of Israel. You've got all of these other stories that even within them we get moral lessons on how to follow the prophets of Allah. Last night we began this discussion on akhlaq. We talked about the fact that in the world that we live in today, ethics are of 2 different types. You have what are called secular ethics, where the secularists say that you don't need God to know morality. You can use reason, you can use intellect, you can use these sorts of tools. You don't need God to come and tell you what is good and bad. And we also mentioned that there are religious ethics. And we also hopefully drew the conclusion that secular ethics cannot address the evils of society, because obviously with secular ethics, the bar continuously moves, because the rules are made by those who benefit from them. So for example, in Canada, when cannabis was legalized about 5 or 6 years ago, I think in 2016, there were obviously hands at play. There were people, I'm sure, who were lobbying the government, just as it happens in many countries. Things are legalized, such as weapons in America, the gun industry, the NRA. They lobby the government. They give massive donations to get laws pushed. So morality, from a secular point of view, we can never accept, because it's not about what's right or beneficial or good. It's about who has the most money, who's got the loudest voice in Parliament Hill, who has the loudest voice at the White House, at the Congress, at the Senate. And so we made the conclusion that only religion can give us morality, and not only religion, but only the religion of Islam. And not only Islam, but only the teachings of Muhammad and Ali Muhammad, alayhim wassalatu wassalam. Tonight, I want to piggyback off that discussion and take it to another level. This morality is the moral system, the moral compass, as I called it last night. Is it relative or is it fixed? Does it change? Does morality or the moral practices that we have in Islam, are they fixed and they can never, there's no deviation? Or is there room for a bit of maneuvering around there? And you might think, well, what's the difference? If a rule in an akhlaq is set, why should I be allowed to have flexibility in it? If a rule is set by the Quran, by the Prophet, by the Ahlul Bayt, alayhim salam, then why should I even worry about there being room for deviation from that? Let me just give you one example. I talked about last night in chapter 49, Surah Al-Hujurat, which I mentioned is the chapter of Islamic ethics. There's the verse where Allah talks about the fact that riba, backbiting, talking about somebody else, is a major sin. Right? Allah compares it to eating the flesh of your dead brother. Nobody in this room is accountable. When we want to eat meat, we go to the grocery store, we buy a pound of beef or some chicken or some lamb or goat. We don't eat one another. That's illegal, it's haram, it's nasty. But when we talk about other people, we are eating the flesh of our dead brother, our real brother or our spiritual brother. But what if I were to tell you we have hadith where we are allowed to do riba in at least 3 instances, and is not considered impermissible? We're allowed to sometimes do riba, to talk about somebody. I'll give you one example of the 3. Say that somebody in the community has proposed to somebody else. One of the young men in our community proposes to one of the sisters. And you know that boy, or you know that girl. And the other, somebody from the other family comes to you and they say this proposal has come. Do you know this boy? And now you know that unfortunately he drinks alcohol, he smokes drugs, he does this and that. In those instances, we're allowed to do riba because there is a greater good that would come out of it. Because marriage is obviously a very critical issue in anybody's life. It's not just a 1 week or a 2 week thing. This is a lifelong commitment. And sure, you'll tell me people can change, they can convert, they can become better believers, and I don't doubt that. But at that particular time, that is where a critical decision has to be made. And so Islam tells us if somebody approaches you, first of all, and you know something about that person that would cause the potential other spouse maybe difficulty or stress or anxiety or worse in marriage, you are obligated by the religion to let that person know those things that would affect their decision-making process. Nothing more than that. So yes, riba is still haram, generally speaking, but there are exceptions to the rule, and there are exceptions for many of the moral teachings, and that's why we need to know this, that is Islamic ethics relative or is it fixed, because it will help us get out of situations we may find ourselves in, and it will help us navigate that we do the right thing, we say the right thing, and that we ensure protection and safety of our community. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Chapter 30, Surah Al-Rum, the chapter of the Romans. Verse number 30. So very easy to memorize, 30. It is one of the most, obviously all of the ayat of the Quran are important. We should memorize as much of the Quran as we can. But there are certain ayat, which really stand out. Surah Al-Baqarah, 286 verses. But Ayatul Kursi, verse 255, is an extremely important verse because Rasulullah gave importance to it. Right? Other ayat, for example, we have the ayat about the Balaya of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Surah Al-Ma'idah, chapter 5, an important chapter. But if you look at the chapter, what you see in the Mawaliyukumullah, about the Walaya of Amir al-Mu'mineen, it's important to know that verse. And just incidentally off topic, but as Shias, as followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, we have to identify those key ayat, memorize them, know the translation, and know the commentary. When a non-Shia comes to us and says, where do you prove the walayat of Ali in the Quran? We should be able to say, look, there's verse 555. There is, the verse about Ikmal al-Dina, Yawma Akmaltu lakum dinakum. We should know that. We should know these key ayats, memorize them, know them, study them, find the commentaries, write them down on your paper or your tablets, and keep those, because there will become a time when you'll have a debate with somebody online or in person, and you need to know these ayats. That's a way forward, inshallah. But let me come back to 30. It's the verse of the Quran which speaks to us about what we call the fitrah, the human nature, the human condition, what we are born with. Right? I talked about this last night, that science may be able to genetically modify human beings in the future as we have GMO food. And I'm sure they're working on genetically engineering human beings to be a superior race, maybe to have a physique or a level of power and strength to work in a military or have powerful eyesight or what have you. But Allah shows us in chapter 30 that there is a fitrah, there is a innate human condition, not physically, but at the spiritual level that Allah has put within human beings. Muslim, non-Muslim, every human born has the innate fitrah, this human nature. And so Allah says, فَأَقِمْ وَجْهَكَ لِلدِّينِ حَنِيفًا فِطْرَةَ اللَّهِ الَّتِي فَطَرَ النَّاسَ عَلَيْهَا لَا تَبْدِيلَ لِخَلْقِ اللَّهِ ذَلِكَ الدِّينُ الْقَيِّمُ وَلَكِنَّ أَكْثَرَ النَّاسِ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. Allah says, then set your face, your being upright. Your spiritual compass, your focus, your identity should be straightforward towards Allah, not towards the East or the West or this ideology or that, system. No, towards that one true pure faith. When he calls the deen al-Hanif, the same deen, the same religion that Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam promoted, that all of the previous prophets brought, this pure, unadulterated, uncorrupt religion of Islam, of submission. And then Allah says that is the original pattern that God created humankind on. We have, as I mentioned last night, that ingrained fitrah of akhlaq. All human beings, regardless of what religion their parents subscribe to, are born knowing that, for example, to steal is bad, to lie is bad, to cheat is bad, to physically hurt somebody is bad. Those are ingrained, we're born with that. But as I talked about the fact, if you recall last night, that 3 factors skew our compass. It could be our parents, it could be our culture, or it could be the community or society that we live in. But Allah says that is fitrat Allah allati fatara an-nasa alayha. Allah created humanity. You can't change that. They cannot genetically change those understandings that we have. And that is the way that we will move until the last human being comes into this world. But what we see in this verse, brothers and sisters, is this fact that there are certain immutable truths which will never change. We're talking about akhlaq tonight. There are certain principles which will never change. Even if a government were to legislate riba, it will always be haram. It will always be, people will be born knowing these things. And so what we want to look at tonight is how or where does Islam stand? Is morality relative or is it fixed? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Takbir. Allah. So the short answer to this question, is ethics relative or fixed? We would say, A, that religion itself is a fixed reality. What Allah gave to all of the prophets, the deen, the religion, is itself a fixed reality. But the example I gave probably a few nights ago about how you have different operating systems, how iOS, every year a new version comes out, how Android, a new version comes out every year. Islam, submission to God, is Deen Hanif, it changed. The religion itself, the practicality, the practical Islam, submission is fixed, but it goes through transformations as humanity begins to progress. So Allah tells us in the Quran, for example, in relation to fasting, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kutiba alaykumus siyam kama kutiba alal ladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. That fasting has been prescribed for you who believe. Fasting has been prescribed to you just as the communities before you had fasting, so that perhaps you may gain in your God consciousness. So fasting is a fixed reality. Judaism today has fasting. If you know Christians, you can talk to them. Christianity has fasting. Fine, it might not be a complete dry fast as we follow. They might eat certain food, they might drink, but they will refrain from certain things, but they have a form of fasting. But the form of it, right, the form has changed. Just like the operating system has changed for our phones, the rules of Islam, the rules of Allah have changed. So the principle is universal. Fasting has always been there. There was a goal behind it. But the reality of the practice has gone through transformation. Praying is the same, Hajj is the same. We read stories about Nabi Ibrahim alayhi salam doing Hajj. Well, did he do exactly what we did or what we do in Hajj? Probably not, right? But there was a Hajj, there was a pilgrimage at that time. Nabi Adam, he comes on earth as the first human being. If he had to do a pilgrimage, there had to be a way to do it, but there was no For example, Zamzam at that time, there was maybe no, the pillars for Muzdalifah, maybe those weren't there, or the pillars at Mina rather. But there was a concept of pilgrimage towards the house of Allah. So what we understand is that the religion is fixed, but then the practicality will change over time. Like the ahkam, which we'll look at in the next couple of nights, we have many examples in ahkam, in the fiqh, that go with the time that we live in. I gave an example last night, and thinking about it this morning, I want to offer a bit more of a clarification on it. Because maybe some people might have left with a bit of a confusion. I gave the example how, and this is related to both morality and ahkam and the fiqh. I gave you the example of if you go for, let's say, a job interview and there's a member of the opposite sex, we're not allowed to shake their hand, right? Or have physical contact. I said that was haram, and that ruling stands. But then a question comes up is, what if you are a woman and you have a medical emergency? And either there's no female doctors in the city that you live in, or B, you have such a medical condition that there are no female experts in that area. What do? You can't say, well, it's haram for the man to touch me or look at my body because it's haram, so I'd rather die. No, that's haram to do that. So the rule is still that it's not allowed, but because there is an urgency which is much more important, that ruling changes. So then a woman, she can't find a female doctor, she can go to a male doctor and have the medical condition treated. Or for a man as well. If a man has an issue and there are no male doctors or experts in that area, he can go to a female doctor. So under general circumstances, for example, the rules between men and women are fixed. But when an urgency comes, which is much more important, that is where religion says you can bend the rules, only to that extent that you need to solve that problem. And that's why even scholars say that although pork is haram, and eating meat not slaughtered Islamically is haram, but if you were in a situation where you're gonna die, and there's nothing else on earth left to eat, there's no vegetables, there's no fruits, there's no grains, you can't slaughter an animal, then we're allowed to eat that pig. Only in the amount that will keep us alive. To eat more than that is haram. To not eat it is also haram. But that's an extreme circumstance. Not that people say, well, I moved to a new country and I can't get halal meat, so I'll just eat anything. No, you have fish, you have thousands of options. It comes down to it, you go to the farm and you buy the chicken, you slaughter the chicken yourself. Right? And we hopefully will never be put in that predicament where we have to eat anything haram or drink haram, but it is there as an exception to the rule. So that's ahkam. I just wanted to clear that up and show us that the reality of the rulings do change based on a circumstance. And again, why I bring this up in this Muharram session is to not necessarily spoon feed us, okay, what is haram and halal? But if we know the principle, then it makes life easier. So you don't have to email me. Although if you want to email, you can. I'm not saying don't email me. Or you don't have to email a scholar that you trust. What do I do in this situation? No, I know the principle that, okay, X, Y, and Z is normally not allowed. But in case of urgency, like a medical issue, I can go to the doctor. Right? Because if we learn the principles of Islam, then we apply our scenario to that principle. I remember a couple of years ago, some youth in Ontario contacted me. They were very energetic youth, very into creativity. They wanted to, spread the message of Abu Abdullah and Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam in a contemporary format. And so they wanted to compose, I don't want to call it music, but they wanted to compose poetry with a beat that would be halal. And obviously we know that music is not haram. There are styles which are haram, but the Marajih clearly tell us there are certain styles of music which are permissible. Ayatollah Sistani in his book, A Code of Practice for Muslims in the West, he clearly says music is of two types, haram and halal. Keep away from the haram, indulge in the halal. And music obviously has its own definition. I can't go into that tonight, but he gives us this demarcation. And so anyways, these youth contacted me and said, we're creating some poetry with beats, can you listen to it and tell me if it's haram or halal? And I'm like, you know what? Here's the principles. You just follow these rules and you can tell whether it's haram or halal, you know? It's like asking the Maulana, you know, is that restaurant halal over there? Unless you're gonna pay for his bill to eat everything on the menu, he's probably gonna tell you just go and find out, is it slaughtered Islamically, cooked properly, and go with it, go with the flow then. Right? So this is the goal, is that not that we remove scholarship from the community, but as believers, you know, we may come into a situation where we don't know what to do. We don't have access to a scholar. We don't have our app on our phone that we could get the details. But if I know a principle, then I can apply that because I've studied it, I've learned it, I've understood it, and then I can put that into my life without having to worry about it. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Let me show you an example from the Quran which shows us that the ethics can change depending on the scenario or the situation. Because what I've given to you now is just some theory. But let me back it up with a story of the Quran. So chapter 18, Surah Al-Kahf, it's a chapter of the cave. And if you haven't gone through this chapter, and especially the translation of it in the commentary, I would definitely advise all of you to read chapter 18. Obviously, again, the whole Quran is important, but there are so many unique stories in chapter 18. You've got the story of the people of the cave, people who were initially Christians, who were dealing with a corrupt society, their youth, as Allah calls them, that indeed these were youth who believed in their Lord. And so we increase them in guidance. They're youth who basically can't deal with the corruption of society. They lock themselves in a cave. They wake up 300 years later. They go back to the society. They try and buy something with the currency they have. And this is outdated currency. You can't use it anymore. And there's a whole story. But there's also the story of Dhul Qarnayn, who is this, individual. But there's a really beautiful story about a man who is not known in the Quran. His name isn't mentioned. He's a very mystical individual whom we consider to be Al-Khidr. I'm hoping you've heard of the name of Al-Khidr. He is not known in the Quran by name. Even this story, we assume, based on the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, that it's about Al-Khidr and his journey with Prophet Musa alayhi salam. They go through many different stages, many events happen. But there's three things that happen in the story between Musa and Al-Khidr. And Al-Khidr was a man of great wisdom. And then incidentally, we call Dua Kumeo the Dua of Al-Khidr, correct? So we actually believe that Al-Khidr is alive till today, on earth, physically, in the flesh. Just like Prophet Isa is alive, but he's taken up to another realm. But Al-Khidr is alive, living, breathing. We have traditions that say he met Rasulullah. He met Amir al-Mu'mineen. This is why we have the dua of Humayl, which is known as the dua of Al-Khidr. That Khidr taught this to Imam Ali, if not the whole dua verbatim, and maybe not in Arabic. Scholars don't know how he taught the dua. But somehow Al-Khidr gave Amir al-Mu'mineen snippets of this dua, what we read, every Thursday night. So he's a very unique individual. Unfortunately, I don't find anything in English about him available. But anyways, in the story in chapter 18, he does three things. And he told Musa, he says, you will not be able to bear what I'm going to do. He says, إِنَّكَ لَن تَسْتَطِيعَ مَعِيَ صَبْرًا. You don't have the patience to deal with what I'm going to do. Because he was up here at knowledge and ma'rifah. And Musa, although he was given the status of an ulul azm prophet, Al-Khidr says, you still can't bear what I'm going to do. You're going to ask me question after question after question, and you're not going to accept it until we part, and I will tell you the wisdom of what I do. So he does three things. He finds a boat in the middle of at the dock of a port. He goes and he drills a hole in the boat. Musa's thinking, what's this guy doing? This is a perfectly sound boat. He's putting a hole in it. He's destroying private property. They move on in the journey. Khidr says, look, I'm not going to tell you, just let's walk. Number two, they find a young boy. Kid's out there playing. He kills the kid. Boom. Murder right there in front of everybody. He's killing somebody. Musa's perplexed. What is this man doing? He wrecked a boat. Now he's killing somebody, a young child, innocent, Masoom child. Musa asked him, what are you doing? He's like, didn't I tell you, you don't have the patience to deal with what I'm doing? Okay, fine. They move on to the third station. They get to a town. They ask the people of the town, can we have some food? The people of the town just, push them away. But then Al-Khidr finds a wall. It's a dilapidated wall. It's about to crumble and fall down. He gets his cement together. He's a handyman. He's a Mr. Fix-It. He picks up the wall and they move on. And Musa's like, what is this guy doing? He's destroying private property. He's involved in murder, and now he's working for free. He's like, what's this man doing? And then when he asks, and Al-Khidr says, look, didn't I tell you from the first stage of our journey that you don't have the patience to deal with what I'm about to do? Then Al-Khidr says, look, let me tell you what I did. Again, you can read the chapter of the Quran, chapter 18, the story is there, but basically he says the boats, there was a king or a government leader, and he was confiscating people's boats. He would go and see, oh, there's a boat, I'm going to take it. I'm going to take that, I'm going to take that. But when he found that when that man's boat had a hole in it, he didn't want a defective boat. But he made the hole in such a way it could be easily fixed. Normally speaking, for you and I, to go and break something, to go out in the parking lot tonight and find somebody's car and smash the window, that's not a right thing to do. But look at the way that Al-Khidr was doing it. So morally speaking, it's not right to do what he did, but there was a greater purpose. The child he killed, you can say you can't commit murder. There's no good reason. But he tells Musa that, look, that boy who was there, I killed. Allah wanted me to do that, and Allah wanted to give the parents a much better child. And hadith tell us that mother and father lost that boy. The mother got pregnant with a daughter. From that daughter, 70 generations of prophets came. But killing is never good, right? But morally, it's not good. But there was a reason here, and Allah pushed him to do it because he's not going to get a sin for it. That was his obligation. The wall, he says, well, there was 2 orphans in the city. They didn't have mother and father, but their parents or their father had buried some treasure under that wall. And when the children would grow up, they would get that treasure and they would be self-sufficient. So yes, I didn't get paid for the job. But the fact is that Allah wanted to provide for those 2 orphans. And so I did that. Normally speaking, we don't usually work for free. And people say, well, I'll volunteer at the center, I'll volunteer at an organization. That's definitely good to volunteer. People who, for example, this center we're in tonight, this is run by volunteers. I don't think people that come and open the door and close the door and do the grass and the maintenance, I don't think they get paid, right? So volunteerism is definitely great. But at the same time, as a community, we always have to recognize the fact that our communities cannot be sustained on volunteers. There is a time to volunteer, and there's a time when you need, let's say, professional help, you have to pay. And as I mentioned this a couple nights ago about the wilaya that we have over one another, that we shouldn't think, well, he's a fellow brother or she's a fellow sister, they should do it free sabilillah. No, free sabilillah is one thing, but if you have a professional doing a job, you have to compensate them. Just as you'd hire an outside contractor, and you pay them on time their amount, and they may give you a discount if they see this as a house of God, which is great. But as a community, we also have to recognize to contribute and support our own people in our community. Yes, they'll come and do it for free. They don't want recognition. Like the Ahlul Bayt, la nuridu minkum jazaan wala shukra. We don't want your rewards or accolades or dedications or anything. We just do it for the love of God. But as a community, we have to recognize that we have to help lift each other up out of not poverty, but to help one another out, to give our own people, right? Keep the money within our community. Many communities do this. You go to some other religions, and they will hire people from their own faith background. They'll put job postings in their own churches or synagogues or temples or masjids. Right? They won't look outside of the community, they'll look inwards. And if they can't find somebody, then they'll go out. But as a community, we have to keep our money in our community. We shouldn't give money to others. Why? We have mu'mineen brothers and sisters who are professionals, experts, that do a good job. Hire them, bring them on board, pay them the right wage. Don't ask for discounts all the time. Do it, give them the money, and we move forward towards the time of our 12th Imam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So let me conclude this in the next few moments tonight. That in short, morality will always stay stable, but the behavior will change depending on the situation. As Al-Khidr, he did those 3 actions. Morality, the morals of killing are still there. The morality of destruction of private property is still there. It's still not something you and I can do. What he did to build up that wall, without taking money, the morality of that was still there. But the behavior would change based on the situation, the scenario that we're in. I gave the example at the beginning of Ghiba. Ghiba will always be haram. But there are situations which will change it, in which case that haram would no longer be attached to it. Because Allah knows the intention why we're doing it, as long as we don't overstep the bounds, we don't exceed what we're talking about when it comes to speaking about somebody else, we're okay. We're not going to be classified as committing a sin. Lying is always haram. But there are times when lying becomes permissible. So to conclude and to summarize this as we move on tonight, is that just as we will see with ahkam, the fiqh, that it will change, akhlaq, the morality will always stay, but we have to look at the situation we're in, judge what is happening, and that means we have to have a very broad vision of Islam. We have to know the Quran, we have to know the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam as much as we can, or we tap into scholars who know and who can give us that guidance. But we have to be at a level where we can also try and recognize ourselves that, am I now in a situation where I have to follow the letter of the law? Or am I allowed to deviate from it a bit because there's a greater good involved in that? And it won't happen overnight. It might take us months or years to get to that level. But ultimately, we have to, as a community, move forward. We can't remain stagnant. We can't remain, in a state where we're not progressing in our Islam. We have to always be thinking and taking steps forward in our understanding. Because ultimately, and we'll see this tomorrow and the night after that, when we learn the rules of Islam, it actually makes our life a whole lot easier. They say in the West that ignorance is bliss, but actually in Islam, ignorance is not bliss. It makes your life much more difficult. So when we learn the rules, we learn where we can deviate, where there are what I'll call legal loopholes. It will make our life 1,000 times easier because we will know what to do in any situation, and we will then be able to fulfill our obligations to Allah and get the rewards which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised us. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Tonight, as we continue in this tragedy of Karbala, as I mentioned a few nights ago, when we're trying to trace the roots of the revolution of Abu Abdullah, I mentioned don't look at it as a fight between Yazid alayhi and Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. It wasn't a clash of personalities. And Abu Abdullah made that clear, where he told in his sermons, he says that mentally, somebody like me can never pay allegiance to somebody like Yazid. Meaning that just like Rasulullah could never pledge allegiance to Abu Sufyan and all of those people, Amir al-Mu'mineen would never pledge allegiance to the first three Khulafa. We know he never did. Imam Hassan would never pay allegiance to Muawiyah, rahmatullah alayh. Abu Abdullah would never pay allegiance to the tyrant of his time, Yazid, rahmatullah alayh. All the way down. And it was also a lesson and a wake-up call for you and I. That we as the Shias of Ali Muhammad, that we would never pay allegiance to an individual or an ism, a societal norm. We would not say, okay, capitalism is the best system. secularism is the best. No, that is or feminism is what we should follow. No, those are as demonic as Yazid, as Muawiyah, as the family of Banu Umayyah who were evil. And so Abu Abdullah wanted us to know as well that we also have to tread in his way, whether it's about a person or an ideology. So as I said, although a few nights ago that we had the two tribes, Banu Umayyah and Banu Hashim. Banu Hashim is from the family of Rasulullah, obviously comes from there. Banu Umayyah, we have the likes of Abu Sufyan, of Muawiyah, of Yazid, and all of those individuals. What the Quran calls as Shajaratul Mal'un, the cursed tree. In the Quran in chapter 17, Allah refers to them as the wicked cursed tree, the family tree of corruption. But what was happening? As I mentioned, Abu Abdullah, in the middle of Rajab, the year 60 AH, after the Hijrah, he gets note that Muawiyah has died. And even before that, we know that with Amir al-Mu'mineen, there was obviously the wars he had to fight. After his Shahada, Imam Hassan alayhi salam takes over. Because of the political games and manipulation that Muawiyah was playing, Imam Hassan alayhi salam, our beautiful second Imam, the one who's overlooked, the one who's really madloom in our community even, he had to sign a peace treaty with Muawiyah, rahmatullah alayh, and there were conditions in that treaty that Muawiyah agreed to. One of them was that when he dies, he would not appoint anyone to take over the Khilafat. Not his son, not anybody else. Though as we know that this was a corrupt group of people, they had no, they weren't truthful to their word. These are people who fought Rasulullah for 23 years. You think now they're going to come and be nice people? So soon as Muawiyah dies in the middle of Rajab, it's known that his son Yazid, the cursed womanizer, drunkard, man who is into bestiality, into so many things, he takes over. And as I mentioned, that he basically he compels the governor of Medina to extract the oath of allegiance, the bayat, from Abu Abdullah. Comes to the end of Rajab, Abu Abdullah gets the family and the companions of the family ready. They leave Medina to go to Mecca. They leave at the end of Rajab. We're told in the historical books on the 3rd of Sha'ban, they arrive in Mecca. About a 5-day journey for them, about 100 kilometers or so a day. They get to Mecca. He's there for 4 months and 5 days in Mecca. What was he doing? Not just doing tawaf all night and praying, but that is where he was writing those letters. You know, we heard about those 20,000 letters that the people from Kufa sent. He was writing those letters at that time to the people of Kufa and Basra in Iraq, and they were saying, "We need an imam. We need you as the leader." He was busy doing that. Yes, he recognized that Mecca was the focal point of Islam, and he knew that Yazid hopefully had enough scruples and enough morals, although I know he didn't, that he would not attack in the Kaaba, that his troops would not defile the sanctity of Mecca. But as we know that even that would have been out the window because Yazid later on destroyed the Kaaba through a massive, vicious attack. But Abu Abdullah was writing letters. He was leading Jamaat namaz every night, and hundreds, if not thousands, were praying behind him. They recognized him as the grandson of Rasulullah. They had that love and respect for him, and so they would come to his Jamaat prayers every night. He was giving lectures, obviously. He was working with people who were asking him questions, so he wasn't silent. He was very politically active in those 4 months and 5 days because he wanted to awaken the conscience of the society. He wasn't scared about his death. He wasn't scared that he would die. He knew he was a marked man. His death had been written. Rasulullah had foretold this to Angel Jibreel alayhi salam. His mother, Bibi Fatima, knew the story of Karbala the day that he was born, or weeks after he was born. Rasulullah read the Masa'ib of Abdullah to Bibi Fatima alayhi salam. So he knew he was going to be killed. A, he didn't want the Kaaba to be desecrated. And B, obviously he had to do what we call Itimam al-Hujjah. He had to complete the argument and show who the true face of Ahlul Kufa were. And so he leaves, as we know, on the 8th or so of Dhul Hijjah, he leaves on the Ihram, he moves towards Kufa, he ends up in Karbala. And we end up here tonight, brothers and sisters, on the 6th night of Muharram, as we remember 2 young warriors Historians differ a lot on these two boys, Owen and Muhammad. We know for a fact that they were brothers, but historians seem to tell us that they are not actually both the sons of Bibi Zainab alayhi salam. We know that Owen for sure was the son of Abdullah ibn Ja'far al-Tayyar, and his mother was Bibi Zainab alayhi salam. But Muhammad, we're told, although his father was Abdullah ibn Ja'far, but he had another mother. So they were actually half brothers. But whatever the case may be, they were two young warriors from Banu Hashim. They had the blood of Abu Talib running through their veins. They had the chivalry of Abu Talib. They had the chivalry of their father's family. They had the blood of Amir al-Mu'mineen and the chivalry of Amir al-Mu'mineen running through their blood. And as we know that they initially had not gone to Mecca with Abu Abdullah, they made their way a few weeks or a few months later. And actually, as Abu Abdullah, the caravan were leaving Mecca, that is when Abdullah ibn Ja'far leaves Medina. He goes to Mecca with his two sons, and he gives them a letter, and he tells them to go and catch up to the caravan as they left the city of Mecca. And as they approach Abu Abdullah, they meet their uncle and they say salam, they greet the family, and they give Abu Abdullah this letter. And basically, Abdullah ibn Ja'far tells Abu Abdullah, he says, I can't be there with you. He had his own issues, physical, mental, he had physical issues, he had health issues that didn't allow him to go. But he says that I'm sending you my two sons. And then on that day that Rasulullah had foretold, when you need help and there's nobody there else to help you, that my two sons will be my representative. And brothers and sisters, that is exactly what it was. That on the day of Ashura, when all the family were giving their lives for Abu Abdullah, Bibi Zainab alayhi salam recognized that her two boys are there, that these two young great warriors are there, that they have been asked by their father to be his representative on the day of Ashura. And as the historians mentioned, that these two young boys, who probably did not have that much experience in the battlefield, but they had the blood of Banu Hashim running in their veins, that they make their way to the battlefield, that they want to be there to protect Abu Abdullah before other people can go. And although they fight a very brave fights, they fight a very valiant fights, but eventually the enemies overtake them. The enemies circle them from all different directions, attacking them, hitting them with their spears, with their swords. And eventually a point comes that as every one of the shuhada, when they would begin to fall, they would say to Abu Abdullah, Assalamu alayka ya Abu Abdullah. And Owen and Muhammad, these two young men are no different. They let out a scream to Abu Abdullah, saying their farewell salams. Eventually, as these two young boys leave this world, as their soul leaves their body, and their bodies are taken back to the tent, and all the people who are alive from the camp of Abu Abdullah, they look at these lifeless bodies of these two young boys, and we're told that Bibi Zainab alayhi salam, she's in the tent. She doesn't come out to see the bodies of these two young boys. She doesn't come out to see her two children. But yet what she does is she goes into sajda. She goes onto the ground in prostration. She thanks Allah. She thanks Allah for giving her the opportunity to have two young boys that gave their lives for the sake of Abu Abdullah and for the sake of Islam on the day of Ashura. وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيُّ مُنْقَلَبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ إِلَى لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. Fatima Hussein.
सिलसिला जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादारी रहे। से शम्मा जले, सिलसिला जारी रहे, हम रहे या ना रहे, ये आज़ादारी रहे। से शम्मा जले सिलसिला जारी रहे हम रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा जले अपनी नस्लों को सिखाते रहो मातम का हुनर सीना दर सीना करे बस ये आज़ादारी सफर कैसे हालात भी हो ये अमर जारी रहे हम रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे से शम्मा जले सिलसिला जारी रहे हम रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा जले लग बदले ये ज़माने की रविश और मौसम एक पल भी न रुके इश्क़े अज़ा और मातम मातम शहर का जुनून चलने वाली रहे अब रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा जले सिलसिला जारी रहे हम रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा जले तुम अगर ज़ाकिर शब्बीर होने रहे चले दम के लिए सर भी कटे घर भी जले हुर्मते फर्शे अज़ा जान से प्यारी रहे हम रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा जले सिलसिला जारी रहे हम रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा जले ये सभी यूं ही आबाद रहे आले रज़ा और घर घर में नजर आए अलम गाजी का ये अलम ऊंचा रहे ये अलमदारी रहे हम रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा जले सिलसिला जारी रहे हम रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा जले अपनी नस्लों को सिखाते रहो मातम का हुनर सीना दर सीना करे बस ये आज़ादारी सफर कैसे हालात भी हो ये अमल जारी रहे हम रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा जले सिलसिला जारी रहे हम रहे या न रहे ये आज़ादारी रहे शम्मा से शम्मा जले या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन या हुसैन
Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein, Ya गुजरे हुए घरों से आवाज आ रही है, 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 उजड़े घरों से आवाज। अब लौट आ मुसाफिर, अब लौट आ मुसाफिर, सहरा बुला रही है, उजड़े घरों से आवाज आ रही है, आवाज आ रही है, गुजरे हुए घरों से आवाज। एक साल यूं गुजारा नहीं मेरा है, बस ढूंढती है भैया तुमको मेरी निगाहें, अब लौट आओ अकबर, अब लौट आओ अकबर, सुगरा बुला रही है, आवाज आ रही है, उजड़े हुए घरों से आवाज। ऐरोन और मोहम्मद तुम जिनमें खेलते थे, सोनी है अब वो गलियां, वीरान है वो रे, अब लौट आओ प्यारो, अब लौट आओ प्यारो, दुखिया बुला रही है, उजड़े हुए घरों से आवाज आ रही है, ऐरोन और मोहम्मद तुम जिनमें खेलते थे, सोनी है अब वो गलियां, वीरान है वो रे, अब लौट आओ प्यारो, अब लौट आओ प्यारो, दुखिया बुला रही है, आवाज आ रही है, अब लौट आओ मुसाफिर, मुसाफिर अपनो तेरा मुसाफिर ज़हरा गुनाह नहीं है हुए घरों से आवाज़ आ Jambar Hamalambar Kulubsar Muhammad Tarakharin Bolki Balawiyat Mahdi Mahmud Salawat Dil tarari ya Husaini Rukhzat zari ya Husaini Dil इश्क़ तुमकुना दिल मुपरेश इश्क़ तुमकुना दिल मुपरेश शोलक शादन दर्द है खुद करार मुक़स सही मरिगत दर्द मुताबिया हुसैनी दिल करारिया हुसैनी रुख़सत ज़ारिया हुसैनी दिल इश्क़ तुमकुना दिल मुपरेश इश्क़ तुमकुना दिल मुपरेश शोलक शादन दर्द है खुद करार मुक़स सही मरिगत दर्द मुताबिया हुसैनी दिल बेकरारिया हुसैनी रुख़सत ज़ारिया हुसैनी अकबरियाना शेर तिलावत अकबरियाना शेर तिलावत रात जमाई जुलरी पैदावर खुद करार मुक़स सही मरिगत दर्द मुताबिया हुसैनी दिल बेकरारिया हुसैनी रुख़सत ज़ारिया हुसैनी अकबरियाना शेर तिलावत अकबरियाना शेर तिलावत रात जमाई जुलरी पैदावर खुद करार मुक़स सही मरिगत दर्द मुताबिया हुसैनी दिल बेकरारिया हुसैनी रुख़सत ज़ारिया हुसैनी आसमियाना शेर तिलावत आसमियाना शेर तिलावत रात जमाई जुलरी पैदावर खुद करार मुक़स सही मरिगत दर्द मुताबिया हुसैनी दिल बेकरारिया हुसैनी रुख़सत ज़ारिया हुसैनी आसमिना दामाद खुजाशत आसमिना दामाद खुजाशत तेरे सुमैया सनम कनाशत तेरे सुमैया सनम कनाशत दिल बेकरारिया हुसैनी रुख़सत ज़ारिया हुसैनी दिल
عباس رأنا شير دلار عباس رأنا شير دلار راست في آن نهار دل بقراری یا حسینی رخ زاری یا حسینی دل عشق مکنا دل مفریش عشق مکنا دل مفریش شالک شادن در دل حیر کرد قرار ما بستی مرگ در تبداوی یا حسینی دل بقراری یا حسینی شفقت زاری یا حسینی بر خاتم انبیا محمد مصطفی صلوات السلام عليك يا رسول الله السلام عليك يا نبي الله السلام عليك يا حبيب الله السلام عليك يا سيد خير الخلق السلام عليك يا رحمة الله العالمين السلام عليك يا بالقاسم محمد السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله وعلى الأرواح التي حلت بفنائك عليك مني سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعل الآخر مني لزيارتكم السلام على الحسين وعلى علي الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين السلام على الحسين وعلى علي الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين فيما مولى بالفضل العباس وعطاته ومولاته سيدتينا الإمام حسن مجتبى وشهداء كربلاء جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته السلام عليك يا قريب الغرباء السلام عليك يا معين الضعفاء السلام عليك يا شمس الشموس السلام عليك يا مدفون بأرض الدوس السلام عليك يا أنيس النفوس السلام عليك يا سلطان بن علي بن موسى أيها الفتى. السلام عليك وعلى آبائك 7 وأولادك 4 جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك وعلى أختك فاطمة معصومة سلام الله عليها. السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان. الأمان 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 من فتنة الزمان. السلام عليك يا صاحب الزمان، يا خليفة الرحمن، يا شريك القرآن، يا إمام الإنس والجن، يا مظهر الإيمان، يا طامع الكفر والطغيان. عجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله تعالى مخرجك ودورك. اللهم اجعلني من أعواني وأنصاري ومستشهدين بين يديك. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم كن لوليك الحجة ابن الحسن صلواتك عليه وعلى آبائه في هذه الساعة وفي كل ساعة وليا وحافظا وقائدا وناصرا ودليلا وعيدا حتى تسكنه أرضك طوعا وتمتعه فيها طويلا برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. أما يجيب المضطر إذا دعاه ويكشف السوء. 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 اللهم اغفر للمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم الأموات. تابع بيننا وبينهم بالخيرات، إنك مجيب الدعوات، إنك على كل شيء قدير. اللهم ادخل أهل القبور السرور. اللهم اغفر كل فقير. اللهم اشفع كل جائع. اللهم اكس كل عريان. اللهم اقض دين كل مدين. اللهم فرج عن كل مكروب. اللهم رد كل غريب. اللهم فك كل أسير. اللهم اشفع كل فاسد من أمور المسلمين. اللهم اشف كل مريض. اللهم اشف كل مريض. اللهم اشف كل مريض. اللهم سد فقرنا بغناك. اللهم غير سوء حالنا بحسن حالك. اللهم اخذ عنا الدين واغننا من الفقر، إنك على كل شيء قدير. على الأرواح المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات الأحياء منهم الأموات، وعلى أرواح الشهداء والصديقين وعلماء مراجع الماضين وشهداء كربلاء جميع وشهداء الإسلام وجميع مرحومين أموات وجزاشتكان الحال وأموات وجزاشتكان حاضرين وغائبين وملتمسين دعاء ومشاهدين الكرام وبراء سلامتي إمام الزمان وسلامتي جميع مجاهدين وفيروزي مجاهدين الإسلام وناظرين كفار ومشركين ومنافقين وداعشين والسلفيين والوهابيين والطالبان الظالم
وبرای برآمدن حاجات و قبولی طاعات و عبادات خصوصا این سینه ها مجالس عزا و برای هدایت جوانان و نوجوانان برای آموزش جمیع مرحومین خصوصا قدر الله برادر همایون زیدی و جميع المؤمنين والمؤمنات وتعجل در فرج ظهور مولاه صاحب العصر والزمان الفاتحة مع السلوات. اللهم صل على محمد وآل صلوات على محمد وآل
I had one question. Oh, sure. I can good. Abdominal dip. And one of my friends.
I know the traditional let me take a look again. I mean, this is a ruling I saw like 20 years ago. And I mean, I have to take a look at it.
Because my friends, where I you call yourself.
Yeah, so generally speaking, I mean, one of the